You're looking for an electric midsize SUV, but you're not sold on Tesla's Model Y, and you're looking for something with a little more attitude than Toyota's BZ4X or Volkswagen's incoming ID.4. Well, this is the Cupra Tavascan, and it aims to fill exactly that niche. We're driving the Tavascan in Europe ahead of its Australian arrival, and at the time of shooting, prices for our market were not yet available. The brand has said, however, to expect the prices to start above the $65,000 mark. What we do know is the Tavascan is set to arrive in Australia in two variants: a rear-wheel drive Endurance, which is focused on driving range, and an all-wheel drive VZ, this one here, which is focused on performance. A high level of standard equipment will arrive on both variants if international cars are anything to go by, and this includes at least 19-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights with triangle DRL patterns, a massive 15-inch multimedia touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto and built-in navigation, a 5.3-inch digital dash cluster, ambient interior lighting, wireless phone charging, keyless entry and start, and an interesting array of synthetic but sustainable trims for the seats. The top-spec VZ we tested adds a second motor on the front axle for a significant power increase, enlarged 20-inch alloy wheels, matrix LED headlights, as well as sportier seats, a progressive steering tune and sport suspension. We expect this car will start closer to the $90,000 mark once it lands in Australia. Missing, at least for now, seems to be EV-centric features like vehicle to load, and we're yet to use an app to see how its connectivity features stack up to the segment leaders. To be clear then, it won't be as affordable as many emerging options in this mid-size space, or even the popular Tesla Model Y, which can be had from a smidge over $55,000, at least at the time we shot this vid. Other options in this space include the Subaru Solterra, Toyota BZ4X, as well as this car's Skoda Enyaq relation, all of which also start in the late $60,000 region. Part of Cupra's whole brand philosophy is making cars with unusual and provocative designs, and the Tavascan applies this to Volkswagen Group's MEB platform with quite some success. Unlike the more traditional shape of the Volkswagen ID.4 or the spacious vibe of the Skoda Enyaq, the Tavascan looks sleek and sporty, with a coupe-style rear and strong character lines for both its face and around its rear three-quarter, which culminates in an aggressive rear spoiler and light bar piece. There are a few elements of this car's design which are a little hard to see from the pics, but up close they actually look really cool. One of them is in the car's snout here. There's actually an air dam that works its way through here and pops up here and goes across the bonnet. That's really cool. There's also the illuminated logo becoming more of a thing on cars. The Cupra text down there using that signature bronze sort of color as well. And if we work our way around here, there's also these quite intricate LED headlights in that triangle pattern. And up close you can really see that bit of texture in there too, which is really cool, and it sets this car apart from not only its rivals but other vehicles in the Volkswagen Group too. The interior itself, as with other Cupras, deserves special attention as the Spanish marque aims to set itself apart and, in its own words, break with convention. Some pieces here will be familiar from elsewhere in the Volkswagen Group, like the large multimedia screen and the rotary dial for the drive selector on the steering column. Inside is where things start to get kind of crazy when it comes to design elements and textures and materials. It's part of Cupra's brand promise, and it really works for it to set it apart from the crowd. Gone is the kind of minimalism that you like to see in Teslas or even this car's Volkswagen ID.4 relation, and introduced is something completely out of this world. Your eye is straight away drawn to this spine thing that runs its way up the center console. It's all raised and elevated and very three-dimensional, and it's finished in this kind of lizard skin texture, which is almost creepy but kind of cool. And it's a reminder that no one's going to sit in this car and think it's boring. It is interesting from every angle. Even this dash here has almost a frowny face kind of design, and the top of it is clad in a single piece of like nice plastic instead of seams and complexities where they don't need to be. There's also that signature kind of copper color that works its way through the dash cladding and into the wheel here, which again, a little bit controversial. I don't think everyone's going to love it, and that's kind of the point of this car. You've got a massive screen here as well, and the little dash cluster which shows exactly what you need. And one of my favorite pieces of Cupra's design, which is this thin little wheel here that doesn't have the chunk of some of its Volkswagen Group relations. Instead, it's like easily chuckable, and that works really well for it in the drive experience as well. So yeah, it's really different, it's really unusual, and I think some people are going to really love it and some people might be a little bit off put by it. But we need designs like this. And that's not to mention some of the cool, innovative materials that Cupra has used in this cabin. My favorite of which being this neoprene finish, which works its way down the center console and down and gives your knee something soft to rest on there as well. And it's in the side bolsters of the seats and on the headrests too, and even for your armrest in the door as well. Now this material is cool because it's not a fake leather, and Cupra's very upfront about trying not to be pretentious when it comes to using these sorts of materials, but still being soft and comfortable, and maybe a little bit more sustainable as well, using more recycled materials in these finishes. Now in the seats, you've got an almost Alcantara style trim down here, and you've got these cutaways in there that have that copper trim kind of coming through the seat, and that's really unusual. You've also got little cutouts in the doors as well, and there's ambient lighting in behind them, and it really makes the cabin pop at night. Okay, when it comes to practicality, there's a little give and take, because with this wild design, there's not the same kind of room that there is in some of this car's rivals. You do get nice big bottle holders in the doors. You get two more in this center console, but because it's raised and fixed at a certain height, if you have a bottle that's too small, it might kind of just get lost in the depths of there, which is a little unfortunate. There's also a little flip opening console here, which is actually really deep, but also very narrow. So there's some objects that you won't be able to fit in there, some that you will. And you've also got this area underneath that sort of creepy spine piece for your wireless phone charger, and there's a little tray in there which is sort of perfectly fits the key, but that's about it. Weirdly, there is another kind of pass-through underneath this console, but because it doesn't have side edges, it's not really a storage area, and I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. Now let's talk screens, because this car does get a really big one. It looks great, it's nice and bright, it's sharp, it's fast, it does Apple CarPlay wirelessly, which is nice as well, but you do have to deal with touch-based sliders to adjust the aircon and volume controls, and there's a touch-based menu for those deeper functions for the climate system. And again, I just feel like that's a little bit of a miss. It is a bit distracting to use while you're driving as well. And then there's the little digital dash in here. It is a lot smaller and a bit simpler than the kind of virtual dash cluster than you see in Cupra's combustion cars. And the other thing is it's not tied to the top of the steering column like it is in some other Volkswagen Group EVs, so it doesn't move with the wheel. But look, it's big, it's adjustable in here. I'm pretty comfortable. It's not a bad interior at all. Let's look at the back seat. Okay, so the back seat, it looks pretty good. I'm 182 centimeters tall, and as you can see, I've got a bit of knee room there. I've got room for my feet as well. The floor is nice and flat, and so that center position might actually be useful for an adult, which is nice. And the soft neoprene trims continue through into these door trims, so you've got somewhere soft to put your elbow. That's not the case in the Born hatch, so that's a nice kind of upgrade of materials that you've got here too. Now, in terms of amenities, you've got pockets on the backs of the front seats, and those are big buckets, so they do obscure your view of the front a little bit, but it's not too bad. And you've got a climate zone back here, heated seats in this VZ spec, adjustable air vents, and two USB-C ports as well.
The boot measures in at 540 litres, which sounds pretty big despite its coupe roofline. It seemed like a sufficient amount of space in our travels, but check back at the Tavascan's local arrival to see how it measures up once we can test it with our standard luggage set.
Now the base endurance delivers 210 kilowatts, 545 newton meters through the rear axle, while this top spec VZ adds a second motor on the front axle for a total combined of 250 kilowatts.
On this grade, the two motors combine together for about 675 newton meters technically, but as they aren't necessarily able to output the max at the same time, this isn't offered as an official figure. It's powerful, but perhaps not as powerful as some rivals in this space. Instead, the Tavascan leans more into its sporty hardware upgrades, things like suspension and steering, which it uses to give itself an advantage over its Volkswagen Group relations. The Tavascan can charge at a healthy rate of 135 kilowatts on DC for a top-up time from 10 to 80% in around half an hour, while it also comes with an 11 kilowatt inverter for charging on AC, which is enough to make it worth plugging into a slow charger when you're down at the shops. It's also reasonably energy efficient, particularly in rear-wheel drive form. See the figures for that on your screen now.
Okay, so Cupra Tavascan. What's it like compared to other EVs, and what's it like to drive generally? Well, I think there's a few interesting things to say. So we're in a VZ spec here. It's the all-wheel drive. It's the more powerful of the two grades we're going to get in Australia. And it's not as breakneck fast as something like a Tesla Model Y Performance. So that's something to note straight away. It does have a nice sort of gentle roll on for the acceleration, where it's not gonna get too crazy and break the traction or sort of throw you into the back of your seat. But that's not to say it's not quick. It does still have a good amount of poke to it and some quite sensible traction control too. So I think that's a nice balance. It also straight away stands out with a few of those characteristics that set Cupra apart from its relations in the Volkswagen Group, and that's really sharp steering. That's quite a firm but controlled ride. I think Cupra do a really good job of balancing the two, and it doesn't really feel too much like an ID.4, for example. Like, this is quite a keen car to drive, especially when you chuck it into a couple of corners. And the other important thing to note about that is it's not completely locked down. This is a car which will let you get a bit silly with it. It will sort of move its weight around a little bit and break traction if you really push it. And the important thing about that is it feels like a car to drive. It doesn't feel like you're driving a computer like it can with some other EVs. There's an almost organic nature to a few of this car's driving characteristics that make it quite a pleasure to steer. So while it might not be the kind of crazy performer that you might expect from its wild design, it is quite an engaging little car to drive. And I think that's important in an era where EVs are criticized for being a little bit boring. That car-like element which really helps set this car apart from something like a Tesla Model Y or other EVs in the segment is really evident in a lot of the little things as well. It's got quite a nice balanced ride quality. It doesn't have any of that sharpness that a lot of EVs have, and it also doesn't get too unsettled in the corners. It leans into them quite nicely, using its weight quite well. Obviously that's helped along by a really nice tyre choice on this VZ, and as well there's a notable level of refinement in this cabin. It's not too noisy when it comes to tyre intrusion. You can't hear too much of the road texture. And there's not a whole lot of wind noise either. So clearly a lot of thought has been put into that element of the driving experience. The Cupra's also got a couple of drive modes which alter the drive experience quite heavily. Obviously you've got a comfort mode, and then there are two different levels of sport mode which can make the drive experience quite wily. And obviously you can also turn down the traction control if you were to take this thing on a track. So it probably does have a little bit more to go if you really want to push it. But importantly, it's not just about that straight line experience. It is also good to steer. Now, obviously, as we mentioned before, this big screen's lovely. There are a lot of shortcut buttons that are nice and close to your hand. And because of A, its size, and B, its probably rightly spec'd resolution, the touch elements are also quite large. This means that you're not jabbing at things that are too small when you're on the go, but it is a shame that there is a lack of physical buttons. It can be quite distracting while you're trying to drive. When it comes to being an EV, it's also got adjustable regen thanks to paddle shifters on the steering wheel, but they're also tied to the drive mode. So Cupra's obviously thought a little bit about how regen might be either advantageous or not so advantageous when you're on the go. Now, when it comes to safety systems, I've found the ones in the Tavascan to be pretty well calibrated. They don't interfere too much with the driving experience unless they really have to. Sort of when you steer out of your lane, you'll get a gentle pullback instead of a violent overcorrect like we've seen from some other cars on the market. The only system that's sort of gotten on my nerves a little bit is the traffic sign recognition. It's picked up a few signs that aren't quite right. It'll just sort of beep at you every now and again. Again, that's a common system that we see on a lot of rival cars, and one which can be quite annoying, particularly in Australia, as we like to have lots of sort of time-dependent speed limits, and it'll pick things up like 40 zones off the back of buses and things like this. That's just a little bit of a shame, maybe the only tarnish to an otherwise very good safety system.
While it seems to have a robust array of active safety equipment, the Tavascan is yet to even be rated by Euro NCAP, so for full details on safety, it's probably best to check back closer to or after its Australian launch to see how it fares.
Now, we don't yet have full ownership details for the Australian market, but you can expect the usual 5-year and unlimited kilometre warranty and likely 8 years and 160,000 kilometres for the battery. You'll have to tune back in early 2025, closer to the Tavascan's launch, to find out what the service intervals and pricing will be. It's unusual, it's divisive, it might not be for everyone, but maybe that's the point. The Cupra Tavascan is set to throw a bit of a wild card into Australia's mid-size electric SUV market. As it stands though, it seems very competitive, and this VZ version in particular might challenge some opinions of how much fun EVs can be to drive. What do you think? Would you pick the Tavascan over one of its more famous rivals? Tell us in the comments below, and as always, remember to check out the full written review at CarsGuide.com.au.